Hello and welcome to this edition of Talk Time. I am Paranjoy Guha Thakurta in the studio of Lok Sabha Television here in New Delhi. In this episode, we are going to discuss the manufacturing of information technology and electronic products in this country. Currently, the market for such products in this country is in the region of 45 billion US dollars. But barely 5%, not even 5% of this total amount of money is in the form of local value addition. India's imports of information technology products, computer hardware, various kinds of electronic products is almost doubling every year. And at this rate, in the next 8 or 10 years, the total value of our imports of information technology products may be as high as a value of petroleum products and crude oil. Now that would pose huge problems for a country which already has a huge current account deficit. So how do you promote indigenous manufacturing, indigenous value addition? What are the government's policies in this regard? What needs to be done to change these policies? These are some of the issues that we're going to discuss. Let me welcome the guests who are here with me in the studio. I'm very happy to welcome Mr. J. Satyanarayana, Secretary Information Technology. He's an Indian Administrative Officer of the Andhra Pradesh cadre of the 1977 batch, has been associated for the last 2 decades with information technology, with electronic governance, e-governance, and the previous position he held was Chief Commissioner Land Administration in the government of Andhra Pradesh. Thank you so much, Mr. Satyanarayana, for coming here. With us here we have Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya. He wears a number of hats. He's here in this program representing the Center for Digital Economy and Policy Research, which is an independent think tank which is looking at how to promote the digital economy in India, the digital industry in India, but he also holds at least two other hats. He's a Director South Asia in Hewlett Packard, HP, and an adjunct professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. Thank you, Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya, for coming here. Let me ask you, sir, the first question. And the question is, do you really believe that if at the rate at which we are importing electronic products and information technology products, in the next 8 or 10 years, the value of imports is going to overtake the value of crude oil, which is the single largest item of import at present? It's about roughly one third of our total import bill. And that would have pretty serious consequences, negative consequences for the economy.
Yeah, I think the demand is going to be about $400 billion by 2020 for electronic products.
So from 45 billion we are saying in 2012, 2013, 8 times higher. Yeah. 8 years down the line, like a virtual doubling every year, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is going to be a problem both from the point of economy, but there is also a deeper reason, that is the strategic requirements of the country in some of the sensitive sectors.
You mean defense?
Defense and space and atomic energy and so
telecommunications
on. Telecommunications included. So these we need to have self-reliance in all these areas as far as the electronics are concerned, because electronics form the heart of any major systems going forward. Yeah. So this is going to be,
in fact, it's often described not as a product, but as a product which is embedded in so many other products. I mean, there's today hardly any industry worth talking about in which equipment or capital equipment, machinery is used, which does not, have some electronic component, whether it be automobiles, whether it be steel making, you name it, it's all there.
Absolutely. I think it's all pervasive. Just as IT is, even the electronics is all pervasive today. Yeah. And so given this kind of importance that it has from strategic and economic reasons, we in the government of India came up with a new policy on promoting the manufacture of electronics.
This is 2012.
In the year 2012. Yeah, it is.
Let's discuss this policy a little later. I want to confine myself to the big picture, Dr. Bhattacharya. We are heavily dependent on imports today. As the addition, the local value addition, is barely 5% out of this total of 45 billion, which will go up to 400 billion. So, what would you like to add to what the Secretary has said about the in terms of self-reliance, in terms of strategic importance, the importance of local value addition?
Besides the strategic part, from an industry perspective, if we look at it, we seem to be sleepwalking into an era where we are manufacturing very, very little of the $400 billion that we're going to talk about, which means that as an economy, we will have by 2020 almost 50% of our GDP in current terms being imported, because half of it will be IT and electronics, half of it will be petroleum. And clearly as an economy, that's not sustainable.
We already have a current account deficit, which is 6.7% of our GDP. It's a record situation. We've become excessively dependent on inflows of foreign currency from foreign institutional investors, which has made our economy very vulnerable.
Absolutely. So when we are talking about vulnerability, it's from an economic perspective we are getting vulnerable. We're getting vulnerable from a security perspective also. As Mr. Satyanarayana mentioned, there are critical information infrastructure which are going to get affected. And using that kind of an attack mechanism, if I can put it that way, the cyber warfare, which is popularly called, there have also been incidents where social warfare has been unleashed. And that,
you're talking about misuse of social networking sites like Facebook. Are you talking specifically of
I'm talking about
incident
that,
like in Bangalore, when young people from the northeast got so scared that they went back home? Yes?
Absolutely. So I'm talking about that, as well as infrastructure such as mobile phones. Because people who have got access to their information did not get access necessarily through internet in the traditional way. They got access through mobile phones and other mechanisms. If you're not able to trace back as to who seeded that information, that is social warfare, using cyber warfare. Now, that's one part of the whole issue, which is how it's impacting the economy. The second part of it is, as a wannabe IT superpower, we have only one part of the game in place, and that's not sustainable. So I'm talking about the software and services that is in place. We clearly need a story of hardware being manufactured. And as you rightly said, hardware is embedded everywhere. So if you look at the studio itself, the lights are being controlled by electronics, the earphones that you have is controlled by electronics, the glasses that were made by electronics.
Okay.
So electronics is all over the place.
Yes, as Secretary Satyanarayana pointed out, it's all pervasive. Let me come to you briefly. And here is a touchy subject. You know, India's biggest trading partner is China. India and China are the two most populous countries on the planet. Together we have about 40% of the world's population. Right now we are possibly contributing about 20% of the world GDP in terms of purchasing power parity. I understand that India's imports from China, if you look at all hardware, electronic products, has gone up from below 20% of the total about, say, 8 or 10 years ago, to about a 1/3 or over 1/3 at present. What are the implications of this? Why? Because we've seen periodical articles in the newspapers about the whole issue of telecom and security, and maybe you can put this in a certain perspective.
Yeah, I think a couple of decades ago, the Chinese saw the opportunity in electronics, and they established the necessary policy environment, the infrastructure and the incentives required, and a very deliberate and conscious promotion of electronics took place 2 decades ago. So that's why they are where they are today. In fact, in semiconductors industry, China commands 47% of the total semiconductors consumed globally.
Yeah,
today.
I mean, I've got a figure which says that the total manufacture of information technology and electronic products in India would be roughly equivalent to 30% of India's current GDP. You know, if India's current GDP is about, say, $1.8 trillion or something like that, if I'm correct, yes?
So I'm just going back to China. That's what the kind of interventions they made at the right time. So that's why our dependence on imports in general and imports from China in particular is pretty large, and we need to at least make the necessary corrective, interventions.
Tell me, how much of our concerns about cybersecurity stem from the fact that a lot of the software is embedded in the hardware that we are importing, and that, to what extent does that increase our vulnerability?
Yeah, I think the security can be a function of the malware that gets into the various products. That is, it is not intentionally or noticeably planted there, but it sneaks in a manner. So the malware can also be, on the other hand, planted while manufacturing a particular product. So that is, the later is more insidious and dangerous for us, and which we need to have local capabilities for manufacturing, as well as also local capabilities for testing every device.
We're going to come to this issue of testing, because that's also a somewhat contentious issue. But before that, Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya, if we can again confine ourselves to the big picture of China, India. We have this competition, collaboration, love-hate relationship with our big neighbor. And how does this actually play out on the ground when it comes to import of information technology equipment and electronic equipment?
It's from an industry perspective, you always like to have backup plans. So for example, when we had 85% of the global hard disk capacity in Thailand, and that went down under the floods, there was a huge impact on the IT industry globally. For a couple of quarters, there was no supply of PCs, a very limited supply of PCs.
So that must have resulted in prices going up.
Absolutely. And prices going up, and more importantly, that has got a multiplier effect, because it will go out and impact all other industries, and it will go out and impact the economy itself. And therefore, all industry would like to have a backup option. So if there is bulk of the manufacturing in China, industry would like to have a +1 approach, China and one other place, or two other places where they can have manufacturing setup. So for example, if China is close to North Korea, and if there is a strategic incident that comes up because of the nuclear missile issue and the threat posturing that's happening, that impacts the supply chain.
And especially because we are living in a highly interconnected world today.
Absolutely.
And an incident, I mean, say in the case of, say, finance, this was a different example altogether. You have a problem in Cyprus, but it has an impact in this country.
Absolutely, you're very right, Paranjay. And that's the core of the issue, that we need to diversify the risk. We cannot put all eggs in one basket. But then why is the +1 not India? Okay. When we say China +1, why is it not India? Why is it Indonesia, Vietnam and other countries?
All right. I think you made a good point. We want to discuss this in greater detail. I need to take a commercial break at this particular point of time. This whole issue, can India truly become a superpower? I mean, or do we just have pretensions of becoming an information technology superpower if, we are just adding 5% of the value and we are dependent 95% on our imports? Let's talk about some of these issues. Let's talk about issues like the government policy that you touched on, this whole issue of, say, preferential market access, the issue of testing, and India vis-a-vis India as a signatory to international agreements. Let's talk about some of this. So I get back to you, Mr. Satyanarayana, to you as well, Dr. Bhattacharya. We are looking at the manufacturing of information technology and electronic products in this country, and what can be done to increase local value addition. Stay with us. We'll be back with you in a short while. Welcome back to our discussion on the manufacturing of information technology and electronic products in India. We're also going to discuss issues of cybersecurity, issues of privacy. With me here in the studio of Lok Sabha Television, I have the Secretary of the Department of Information Technology, Department of Electronics and Information Technology, to be very precise, which is part of the Ministry of Communications. And Mr. Satyanarayana is here with me. We also have Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya. He's here representing the center, an independent think tank called the Center for Digital Economy Policy Research. Mr. Satyanarayana, what are the implications of India being a signatory of the Information Technology Agreement under the World Trade Organization? Because in many respects, the World Trade Organization has become, not in a particularly good shape, if I can put it politely. The Doha development round has been in limbo for more than a decade. A new Secretary General is going to be appointed, but we are busy, not just India, the world is busy doing bilateral agreements and, these kinds of regional trade arrangements and comprehensive economic and cooperation agreements. And this whole issue of multilateralism in world trade and having a rule-based system of international trade seems to be on the on the margins as the world is going through a recessionary phase, especially Europe in a double-dip recession. Your views, sir?
Yeah, I think ITA, in the context of what we are discussing now, there is the electronics manufacturing in India. ITA, almost 250 plus electronic products and components come with zero duty. That means the entire globe is a single zone. So this has caused a kind of a setback to the local manufacturing, because we in India have a disadvantage in terms of the higher cost of capital, higher cost of power, and inadequate infrastructure, logistic problems, etc. So when in a zero duty regime, we suffer a significant disadvantage. It is estimated to tune of about 17 to 22% in different electronic segments.
This is the disadvantage that Indian manufacturers have vis-a-vis their international companies. The price difference varies from 17 to 22%.
Disadvantage. Yeah, which is, I mean, a good amount of margin. So we can't promote the electronics industry in such an environment. So ITA, I mean, the regime, while it has done good in terms of free flow of products and made available to our citizens, but at the same time, in terms of manufacturing capabilities, I believe it has caused some setback to us.
Your views on this, Dr. Bhattacharya?
So in terms of the policy interventions that are basically needed, ITA helped the industry grow very, very fast. It reduced the cost of compute equipment for the services industry in our country, which
period of time?
So we're talking from the year that ITA was introduced, and specifically I think we started leveraging from 96, 97 onwards.
So you're saying from the middle 90s onwards?
That's right. And that coincided with the rapid growth that the IT services industry in India had. So it has had a positive impact. And I do understand that it also constrains the government in terms of its ability to do policy making. But the idea was that given the nature of the industry, which coalesces into few manufacturing units all over the world and supplies to the world globally, thereby leveraging massive economies of scale. So ITA in fact enabled certain products to be actually adopted by people because it reduced the cost of those products because of the massive economies of scale it brought in. Having said that, it brings in the issues that the Secretary just mentioned, that it constrains policy making, and therefore some of the interventions that happened in other industries such as the automobile industry is not possible in India.
All right. Mr. Satyanarayana, if we can look at one of the elements of the new policy of the Government of India, the whole issue of preferential market access, as it's called. Now this is supposed to provide a benefit for local manufacturers of information technology products. Up to or upwards of 30% of government procurement, there's a preferential access given to local manufacturers, and even the definition of the government market is being sought to be expanded to include licensees of the government. So it could be a private company which has got a license to operate, say, mobile telephony or run a bank, but that would come within the purview of this kind of preferential market access. Could you explain the policy in some detail, please?
Yeah, the preferential market access policy is one of the components of a comprehensive policy on electronics. We should not see it in isolation, number one. Secondly, what does the PMA mean? It has two dimensions. One is the procurements by the government, and also the second aspect is on strategic considerations and security considerations. So if you look at the procurement by the government of electronics, it is not more than 10% of the whole market, and out of that the policy applies initially to not more than 30%, about 30%. So what we are talking about is only about 3%. It is only a kind of a incentive, it is a kind of a starting point for the to catalyze the manufacturing process in the country.
But you are supposed to
it is not so big or so distorting as it is made out to be in various quarters.
But you are supposed to be also giving this is, as you say, a part of a package of incentives.
Yes.
There are other packages.
Absolutely.
You are supposed to give taxation benefits.
Right.
There is a development fund. Then you have this whole issue of a cluster policy of setting up units. Right. So maybe if you could just tell us a little bit of what you see the entire package of policies trying to achieve.
Yeah, we need to look at the whole policy in three broad areas. One is creating the encouragement for infrastructure creation in the country. Second is innovation, and the third is the incentives. Now, as far as infrastructure creation is concerned, we have the EMC policy, that is Electronic Manufacturing Clusters policy, whereby we as government subsidize 50% of the cost of establishing the infrastructure in such
You
clusters.
also have a modified special incentive package scheme.
Yeah, that is the incentives at the unit level. At the infrastructure, we have the EMC policy, which subsidizes up to 50% in a cluster, because the philosophy of that is, since you can't improve the infrastructure in the whole of the country, you take clusters of say 100, 500 acres, clusters of units in such layouts, and then subsidize the infrastructure created there.
All right.
So MSIPS is the other component which operates at the unit level. Each unit, electronics manufacturing unit, will have subsidy ranging from 20 to 25%, on the capital investments made in that unit. So this is these two together are supposed to offset the debility that the industry
that 20%,
70 to 22%.
That's right, 70 to 22%.
So it will offset part of the debility through these subsidies.
Professor Bhattacharya, to what extent is what the Secretary is saying, the intention of the policy of the Government of India, playing out in actual terms? Is if indeed a local manufacturer is getting, there is a certain neutralization of the loss of comparative advantage, if I can put it this way. You have 70 to 20%, say 1/5. Now, if you're getting that in the form of additional benefits, then why then is local value addition still so low at 5% of total of the total size of the industry? Yes.
I think, Paranjay, there are a bunch of questions that are embedded in your question. Let me take the issues of preferential market access from an industry perspective. I think the first primary concern from domestic manufacturers is that it's not really preferential. The market access is not really preferential because there is no price benefit given. It's still at a price discovery mechanism, which is an open market mechanism, and the domestic manufacturer has to match the lowest price. Now, given all the handicaps that one has, it's very difficult to match that price, and that's the first issue. The second is, given the nuances involved and the complexities involved in implementing such a policy, the fear is that it will lead to a lot of discretionary power coming in with the implementation agencies, not at the policy making, but once the policy hits the ground, the fear is that Inspector Raj might be coming back through the back door, which is where the industry prefers that such interactions happen through a portal or through e-governance, so that there is minimization of the human interaction. The third issue is that in areas where there is 100% market share to be given to a domestic manufacturer because of security concerns and other concerns, the price discovery mechanism might get distorted, which would lead to a weakened industry in the long run. And we may have players who are solely dependent on the government market to survive, which means again that once this policy is over, and we must have a deadline for this policy, an expiry date of the policy, then these players will be washed away. So they will not really help in building a very strong domestic manufacturing in the country. And having said that, if you look at it from a small startup perspective and an MSME perspective, those who do not have too much of wherewithal to manage policies, it will be a significantly additional cost for them to manage
and they'd be at a disadvantage.
Policy. So even though this policy is being crafted for domestic manufacturers and the startups,
it may not help them at all.
I think it requires significant fine-tuning to really help them.
Let's get the Secretary's response to what you're saying, and then we'll take one more break in our program. Yes, sir. Mr. Satyanarayana.
I think these policies need to be implemented in a manner that is transparent and efficient. Then we have the intended benefit. I think we are working on.
He's worried about the license control Raj.
Yes,
returning.
That's what. Once you make it transparent, the question of license Raj doesn't arise, and open it, and based on a self-declaration basis. So all our policies are based on a self-certification, self-declaration.
That means you trust these guys.
Yes, yeah. If they, and then once it is put in the public domain, it is for the competitor to challenge if this declaration is wrong.
No,
so the government
okay.
doesn't come into the picture.
I'll come
So
back to this.
The question
after the
of
break,
license Raj doesn't arise here.
Okay.
In all this, whether it is the PMA, whether it is the MSIPs, whether it is the EMC, it is all based on self-declaration.
And the second point
and
he said about this whole issue of price discovery.
Yeah.
That it's not really giving an advantage to local manufacturers, and also the whole issue, it's not really benefiting the small fellow, the small and medium enterprises. Yes.
No, let me put it this way, that the initially wherever there are local manufacturing capabilities, the policy mentions that we start with 30% preference to begin with and gradually increase it in phases. So there is going to be global competition even in those products, but eventually when we reach 100% self-sufficiency, obviously there are 5 to 7 manufacturers for each product, and local domestic competition will be good enough to sustain market efficiency, and the right price will prevail.
Okay.
So we need not have any undue apprehensions on that front.
All right, I'll tell you what, we take one more break in our program. We are about halfway through our discussion. We have a number of issues to discuss. Let's discuss this whole issue of mandatory safety, this whole issue about tackling hazardous waste. Let's also go back to the issues of security, invasion of privacy.
Time may not gel with the, in case.
Let us see how much we can pack in. We have these.
Gelling with this subject.
All right, sir. All right, we'll see how much we can.
Privacy and security is totally different cup of tea.
All right, let's see how much we can compress in our discussion, Mr. Satyanarayana. I'll get back to you as well, Dr. Bhattacharya. We'll be back with you. We'll be back with you in a short while from now. Yeah. Welcome back to our discussion. We are looking at the manufacturing of information technology products, electronic products in India. Why at present, barely 5% of the total industry is in the form of local value addition. We are looking at issues how we can increase this proportion for a variety of reasons. Self-reliance is one reason. The other reason is ensuring greater safety and security. With me here in the studio of Lok Sabha Television, I have the Secretary Information Technology, Mr. J. Satyanarayana, and I have Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya, representing the Center for Digital Economy and Policy Research. He is also an adjunct professor at the IIT in Delhi and a Director South Asia with Hewlett Packard. Mr. Satyanarayana, many people saying that the guidelines and the rules that have been put together are very complicated, very complex. And as the point that Dr. Bhattacharya earlier made, it's not only discriminating against the small and medium enterprises. Many people believe that you could have companies manipulating the whole system of preferential market access, and it becomes a kind of an accounting jugglery just to indicate that the equipment is domestically manufactured. Is that a real danger?
No, there is. The reason that it cannot